Hey everybody, Aiden G here, back today with another video. I know it's been a while, but today I'm very excited to get into it. Today we're going to be going over the top albums of 2022. Well, my top albums of 2022 at least. Before we get into the list and everything, I just want to shout out this podcast called Listening with Levy. This is a music podcast that's been on the air for a couple years now. It's pretty small. They've only got about 10 or 11 episodes, but it's run by two really great people, and honestly, it's a great podcast if you're looking for new music to check out and just to hear great conversations about the music that's out there. All right, now, before we get into the top 20 list, real quick, I'm not going to explain it. I just want to shout out some honorable mentions that I was strongly debating where to put on this list, but they just didn't end up making the cut. One by one, let's just list them off. We got Man Plays the Horn by Cities of Eve, great rap record. Then we got SOS by SZA, such a great comeback after our 5-year waiting period. And then after that, we got Crest by Blade and Echo 2K. Everything by Drain Gang that came out this year I thought was great, but this was the album that stood out to me the most. And then we got such another great rap record by Pusha T with It's Almost Dry. And then after that, we've got Better Luck Next Time by the up-and-coming hyperpop rapper Midwest. Like I said, all great albums, but let's get into it. The top 20 list, here we go. One more thing before I start this list, I'm just going to tell you right now, looking back at this list, it's kind of whack, but you know what? I put a lot of thought into it. It literally took me like 2 weeks to put this list together, but this is it. This is the list. This is the list, whether you like it or not. At number 20, we're already starting the list off with an odd choice, but honestly, just hear me out for a second. At number 20, we got Harry's House by Harry Styles. Now, honestly, in the past, I've never been one to put Harry Styles or One Direction on my top albums of the year list, but this year, I wanted to include Harry because, honestly, this album did surprise me. That's not to say that this album is miles and miles different or ahead of his past work. It still has such a similar feel, obviously, but I feel that it's still such an upgrade. And I can hear within these tracks, you got Music for a Sushi Restaurant, Late Night Talking, Grape Juice. Oh my God, what a great song. You can hear in these tracks that Harry is trying something new, and honestly, just for such a mainstream artist, especially like him, where he's playing sold out arenas, 6 nights in one arena sold out, with his popularity, it can be really tough to start experimenting. And I think it has a lot of great sounds to it. I think it's got a lot of creative visions, and I think each track is very different from the last. What's funny, too, is that I think this album has some of Harry's best tracks, but also some of his worst tracks. And I know that's such a weird thing to think. It's like, how is that one of your top albums of the year if it's got best and worst tracks? I say that because it shows that Harry was experimenting just a bit. And, he got a little bit of backlash, but overall he did get praise, obviously. And overall, it just stood out to me. I thought it was a really danceable, really poppy, really great record. It had a lot of great influences on it. All right, let's keep it going. Number 19, we got The Family by Brockhampton. The Family is essentially Brockhampton's breakup album. If you didn't already know, Brockhampton has broken up. Or maybe not. I'm not even quite sure. I thought they broke up like a year ago, but it's whatever. Anyway, I thought this record was a really creative way to just exploit everything that's been happening within the band and just talk about everything in just a very somewhat real and honest way. I know a very valid argument could be, oh, this isn't real, this isn't honest, this feels like a Broadway act or something. And I don't know, I just love all the, random dialogue bits and all the just straight up talk about what was going on in the band. I walk through the living room, I see Jabari yawning. The band is over, please stop harassing me. Or saying now that's such a toxic bar to say in a song after you just said it. I just love and love and love the amount of immense detail that Kevin Abstract went through. And honestly, the fact that this is, a Brockhampton album, but it's just Kevin Abstract on it, I thought was such a unique way to put it because it still feels like a Brockhampton project, given how detailed all of the stories are and all the songs. And not only that, the production on this is superb. Kieran really brought it out. Up next, at number 18, we've got Who Cares by Rex Orange County. I know a lot of people could argue that, this is such a basic record, it's so derivative. I honestly would like to disagree, though. I think the lyrics here are so beautiful. Rex's versatility throughout this entire project is just so unique and very emotional. It's honestly tracks like Shoot Me Down and Worth It where I can actually hear the pain in his voice. 1 in a Million for sure as well. And those sad vocals followed by these beautiful piano melodies underneath layering on top of one another is just amazing. And my favorite part about this record is that throughout, he has these sad songs, even the ones with an upbeat attitude, with upbeat production or something. The lyrics and his voice, it still sounds in pain. It's like he's disguising it. And then throughout all the sadness, he just goes on and on. And then throughout the sadness of this record, he actually sprinkles in a couple of just bangers. In the beginning, we get a feature on Open a Window from Tyler, the Creator, which is very animated and very just honest. And then we've got the track If You Want It right in the center and just makes you want to get up and dance. And then the album ends with such a great message, because Rex is going through all these sad stories, all these sad times about how he wanted something really bad and just couldn't get it. And then he just says, who cares? Moving on, at number 17, we've got Things with Wings by Eric DOA. To be honest, when this record was announced, I did not expect it to be going on this list, but god damn. As you can tell so far on my list, this year has been full of surprises. And I mean surprises in a way where the artists weren't bad originally. It's just, they were okay, but they've made it big time, so they're probably not going to experiment. But god damn it, they took the time to do that. What I love about this record is that you can hear Eric's changes and all of his experimenting in all these tracks throughout. And this is a pretty short but long album per se. It's about 15 tracks, but it's averaging about 2 minutes per track. So you got a short amount of time to get as many different vocal styles as you can in there, and Eric takes the time to do that. And not to mention the strongest attribute of this record besides the production, I think, would be Eric's voice. It's so unique and it's so colorful and just, wow, it just sticks with you. And there's definitely some risk taking on here as well. He doesn't just put out a bunch of pop bangers. He actually has some really sad stuff on here too, and it's really beautiful. On the finale of this album, we have Commander Drive, Dear Mama. It's got this beautiful piano melody over Eric's like daunting and like painful vocals. You can hear how much he misses his mom. Overall, just a fantastic record though. Moving on from there, number 16, we've got the album Sick by Earl Sweatshirt. I honestly don't have much to say about this album, but it's on this list for a reason. It's amazing. And what I can say about it is that it's so hypnotic. That's the best word I can use to describe it. Rapping is somewhat calming but haunting at the same time. Not to mention the features on this record are also amazing. You could definitely tell that Earl took the time to find people that would actually work and mesh well on the tones of this record, talking about abandonment and talking about, just being alone kind of in this music world. I think the highlight of this album would especially be Titanic and Tabula Rasa. Tabula Rasa, especially with Billy Woods' first intro verse kind of leading into this whole world. The whole album is very atmospheric in a way, but it's not the normal atmospheric I would expect, with a bunch of synths and a bunch of just open airiness. It's just raw instrumentals, and I feel like I'm in the studio with them right there. Very raw. Moving on from that, we've got another record that totally blew me away. Moving on from that, we've got another record that surprised me. Surprise. That would be at number 15, Willow with Coping Mechanism. I really love the whole punk rock direction that Willow took throughout this whole thing. Vocally, she just doesn't hold back. She just lets everything loose. And that's what I love about this whole record. It's just it feels very freeing. It feels very on the nose. There's nothing being held back, and I love that. And the instrumentals are so unique. There's so much going on with them. Very fast-paced, very exciting, most of all. I just overall really love this new direction that Willow is taking. I think it's very exciting. It's very exciting for her, especially. And I'm looking forward to what she has next. This is great. Up next, at number 14, we've got something driving away from the rock and pop aesthetic. We've got this really such a great R&B record. We've got Sudan Archives with Natural Brown Prom Queen. I really like this album a lot. I gotta say, Sudan's vocals, I could tell she just worked so hard to incorporate her vocals and take time to figure out what the best way to present them is. I also really like this because I had never listened to Sudan Archives before. I had never listened to any of their songs, and just hearing this was, I thought, a brilliant introduction to their work. She's got infectious melodies, she's got great hooks. And honestly, I think this year, for all the albums listed, versatility and lyrics were like one of the strongest attributes. Like, there are some really good but like really weird lyrics in here. But yeah, Natural Brown Prom Queen Sudan, she's just very smooth, very slick with her vocals. I really just love her flow on all the songs. She does a really great job of blending R&B and soul with rap, and it's just one of the best interpretations I've seen, one of the best smooth blends of that I've seen in, honestly, a couple years. Overall, just really clean, really well put together record. Speaking of bringing R&B and rap together, let's go into my album chose for number 13, Love for Rent by Smino. I've been a fan of Smino ever since his album Black Swan dropped, which obviously most people started listening to him after. But honestly, on that record, I liked it, but I felt like there was something there that he was just missing. Like, sure, there were a lot of smooth tracks, there were a lot of great vocal melodies, a lot of great production, but I just felt like it was missing a unique factor. Throughout this whole record, Smino is not only playing with forms of lyricism and structure of his songs, but he's also playing with different vocal styles. And honestly, on some songs, there's vocal flows and styles that he tries to do more often and more interchangeably throughout one track. Not just that, but his features on here, oh man, they just killed it. What's funny is I'm not usually that big of a J. Cole fan, but I thought his verse, where it was very fast, but very like upbeat, it wasn't dark and brooding or trying to be too cool. He was just trying to be like real. With that verse on the track 90 Proof, that immediately won me over. Then you got a track like Pudgy with Lil Uzi Vert, and it doesn't even sound like Lil Uzi Vert. This record is just incredibly new. It's nothing like I've heard before in the R&B rap world. The best part about this record was when I listened to Black Swan, all I kept thinking was Smino has a lot of potential. And with that, I hope he uses the potential sometime in the future. Moving away from R&B and rap, we go to my number 12 pick for the year, which is Capri Songs by FKA Twigs. I feel like FKA Twigs has always done a great job at just creating new sounds and creating new types of songs and just surpassing people's expectations. I feel like just over the years, FKA's discography, she's done a really great job at just overall trying to create a fresh sound and be something new, be someone with a new personality in music, not just a copycat. And I feel like Capri Songs is, just another striking record making that true. I absolutely loved this record when it first dropped. Even though I knew it was going to be great, it was better than I expected. Like a few of the albums I've already listed here, it has a great variety between happy and sad, I feel. But overall, it just has this overarching tone, like this cloud of sadness that hangs over it, and you feel that throughout the whole thing. One of my favorite tracks on here is Meta Angel, and I just love all the different vocal styles that FKA Twigs is able to bring to the table here. And throughout the whole record, there's moments of just pure distortion, but then there's moments of just clean, maybe like light auto-tune vocals. And then you got just somewhat dancey tracks like Tears in the Club. And I think with those types of tracks just sprinkled in the record, like I was saying before with Rex Orange County, I think it's really great because it just keeps the record feeling fresh. When I was first listening to it, whenever I thought the record was just going to stay in one place, it just moved. It kept moving to different moods. But yeah, FKA Twigs, as usual, does not disappoint. Next, for number 11, we've got Glitch Princess by Yule. This album reminds me of a Charlie XCX record, but even crazier. And when I say crazier, I don't just mean, just more drums, more beats, more crazy vocals, I mean just the whole concept of hyperpop, the whole concept of glitch pop, it's just taken to another level in this. And obviously, just being a huge fan of glitch pop in general, obviously I took a liking to it. But Yule has got some great songs here. I really love just the overarching story throughout this whole album. It really stood out to me. Yule kind of turns this album into an autobiography of herself, talking about her life in the UK and struggles growing up and moving to America. And sometimes she just goes into like graphic detail and just opens herself up, and that accompanying these glitch pop feels, where it feels like an off, like almost sporadic but organic song structure, where the song is kind of being created as we're listening to it. None of the songs feel like they were forced together or planned. They feel like they were erupted. Kind of just, Yule just found some ideas and just let them go on their own. I know that's such a weird way to put it, but that's what this album is. It's beautiful but messy at the same time. It's the best type of messy. And yes, there is one track on here, The Things They Did For Me Out of Love, that is 5 hours long. I actually took the time and I listened to it. It took me about a week to get through the whole thing, but I did. And yeah, it's essentially just tones and noise. But I love the idea of it because it's kind of just But I love the idea of it because to me it just seems like background noise, and you're supposed to, while listening to that, just think and just reflect on whatever's been bothering you or whatever you're thinking about in that moment. All right, top 10 albums. Let's do this. Kicking off the top 10, we've got Kenny Beats' debut album, Louie. What I love most about this album, and it's a similar take on my liking of Glitch Princess, it just feels like one whole complete piece. Again, the songs feel so natural and organic. Nothing feels forced or strictly put together. I just really love the way this album was formed. Most of the songs here are just less than 2-minute instrumental loops that kind of carry on to this beautiful chamberatic sound. And this may be a weird comparison, but what I love about this album is the same thing I love about The Life of Pablo by Kanye West. In that sense, I mean the fact that it just sounds like a collection of sounds that were put together to form this story and soundscape. Kind of like you were given a bunch of pieces of something, and with it you chose to make something out of it instead of throw it away or push it aside. And apparently the story behind this album is kind of what that is. Kenny Beats kind of described this as a compilation of sounds that his dad would play when in the car and he was a kid and his dad was driving him around to places. To me, this sounds like I'm walking on the beach listening to a bunch of different radios play at once, but in the absolute best way possible. Good job, Kenny Beats. You solved music. Looks like you're out of work, Fantano. For number 9, we have Chaos Now by Gene Dawson. Gene Dawson's been a name that's been around for a couple years now. He's up and coming, but he's getting high on the rise, and he's entering the pop, rock, rap, folk scene. What I love about this record is the same thing I loved about his last record, Pixel Bath. That being the extent that Gene goes to try and experiment with as many different sounds as he can, but include as many as he can on this record in such a clean fashion. When I say clean, I don't mean like super clean and tidy. No, this album is all over the place, but it sounds. But it's so cohesive in its themes because Gene, not only with his production, but with his voice, keeps the cohesive themes going throughout this whole thing. And let me tell you, not a second of this album is boring. I just really love the different types of sounds he has on here, especially when you look at a track like Pirate Radio, just compared to the whole record in general. I look at that and I think that is such a beautiful way to end such a chaotic album. I just absolutely love this album and everything Gene could offer in a single record. Moving on from there, number 8, we have Black Country New Road with their sophomore album, Ants from Up There. I have to say, I was not the biggest fan of Black Country New Road when they dropped their first album. It's not that it was bad, I just honestly didn't think it was for me. But I have to say, this new record, it just... wow. First off, with the vocals on here, the lead singer Isaac Woods, he's just amazing. And you want to talk about pain in vocals, oh man, Isaac Woods is the man. And honestly, I think Ants from Up There just has the most unique versatility out of any of the records that are on this list. And I really love the contrast too between Isaac's voice and his lyrics, between that and the instrumentals. Like these instrumentals, you know, they're very bare. And when I say bare, I don't mean the bare minimum. I just mean they're very... Another thing with this record is just the contrast between Isaac's raw and just deep, raw and painful emotions you hear in his vocals. That compared to the instrumental, I don't want to say the instrumental is bright and happy, but, you know, at some moments it's just like, it's not emo music. It's definitely just a new type of sound. They're kind of just bringing a new type of formatting to songwriting and kind of this rock / jazzy new wave era. I would have to say Basketball Shoes is probably one of the best songs I've heard this year, given its tempo changes throughout and given its different topics that Isaac covers. In the end, where Isaac just talks about a wet dream he has repeatedly, it's the most beautiful interpretation of that topic I've ever heard in a song. I love it. I think it's great. At number 7, we have probably the best dance record to come out so far this decade, and that is Beyonce's Renaissance. I remember hearing Break My Soul earlier this year for the first time and just thinking to myself, yeah, dance music is making a comeback. But seriously, just Beyonce, she killed it. I absolutely love Beyonce's vocals throughout this entire record. There's honestly not one song on here where I thought she did a bad job or performed poorly or less than maximum. On tracks like Alien Superstar and Cozy, you know, she takes a very sly back approach, very relaxed, kind of just opening up about herself and just what she likes. And then you got tracks like Cuff It and Break My Soul, which are just have immense energy, not to mention also the track titled Energy featuring Beam. This world of dance that Beyonce just welcomes us into is just so new, it's so great, and honestly, this, like I said, one of the best dance records I've heard this decade. Another strong feature to this record is the rapping that Beyonce has throughout some of the tracks. I have to say my favorite rap moment from Beyonce is on the track Heated, where she, at the end, just has this really raw, almost no instrumental rap verse, but over the course of the progression, it's getting like slightly more distorted and saturated. And with that, the drums are kicking in, and it has this really great build-up. America Has a Problem is another highlight because it is the biggest lyrical contrast in a song I have ever heard. Beyonce is essentially talking about drug addiction and drug dealing and kind of just growing up in that area and how it affects you growing up. But this is another one of those high dance energy tracks, and it's not one of those where it's dark, but it's like hype and it just has a lot of angry energy to it. It's like, no, it's presented in a very like danceable tone, and I see that as kind of a way where we just kind of overlook it and kind of just overlook these issues that are going on in America. But who knows? I could be wrong, and maybe Beyonce was just having fun, which, honestly, you go, Beyonce. At number 6, we have Moto Mommy by Rosalia. I think this record is also, you know, like most of the records on here, it's just really fresh. It's got a really new and unique sound to it. Rosalia kind of just lets everything loose here. She doesn't hold anything back. And what I love most about this record is just the amount of experimentation that Rosalia has on here, but it's still so approachable and it's still so great. Like, for example, the track Visa Keto. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. I'm not gonna lie, it's a weird track. It's a really weird song, but it's one of the biggest songs on here. Like, I'm not gonna lie, the vocals that Rosalia has on this record, they get weird. and they just feel like they shouldn't belong with one another. They feel like they shouldn't work, but they do in this really strange and abstract way. And Rosalia's vocals, her flow just goes super hard. And there's a lot of people who say, oh, this record, it's nothing. It's just Rosalia talking about sex. But the thing about it, she's not talking about sex or love in a way that's been talked about before. I feel that she's talking about sex as kind of a resource and kind of a need that we look to each other for. Not so much as a thing we desire, but a thing that we desperately look for and feel that we need our entire lives. Hentai, I feel like, is one of the biggest examples of this because, throughout the song, she's essentially telling her spouse or, whoever she's, seeing in this moment that she wants to create this fantasy. She wants to create this feeling so it feels normal. It feels like a desire instead of a need. And I think using the word hentai, using the subject of hentai is weird and absurd enough to where we're like, oh, this is odd, but in a way we understand. I said that like it was weird. I said that like it was a bad thing, but I think it's the strongest attribute to this whole record, and I think it's amazing. Here we are, top five. Smoking on your top five tonight. Smoking on your what's the name tonight. Speaking of N95, that brings us to our number 5 record. We've got Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Mr. Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick, man, he has done it again. I would honestly say, subject-wise, this is probably Kendrick's best and most intimate record. When I say intimate, I mean, of course, him kind of just being open with us. Not to say that his last 2 records weren't open, but this one especially, he's dealing in topics that he's never spoke about before. For example, on the track Auntie Diaries, he's kind of bringing up the topic of transgender people, and especially transgender people within your family, and just how to react, which is a topic that I never thought Kendrick would bring up before. And I honestly thought he did it in the best way. Throughout the whole thing, Kendrick is just confused, and he's figuring out how to address this member of his family because he loves this person very much, but he's confused just, based in the area he was raised in. Growing up with kids where all they said was slurs, and it's not because he hates people, it's just that's what he was raised with, that's what he knows. Kind of just summing up all these pressures that he's been talking about throughout the record, not just with him, but, with all musicians who have to deal with this. Bringing to attention that, hey, we're human too. And the way he does this, the way he is able to go into such great detail so smoothly is just amazing. What I've always loved about Kendrick's music, just to say that this record, is his most intimate, where he's opening up, that I'm not saying that he wasn't doing that before on his albums, all right? He definitely was. But it's this one, I felt he really was able to take the chains off and just say what he wanted to say. Then you got tracks like Father Time and Rich Spirit, where Kendrick is kind of talking about, growing up without the presence of a father, and growing up poor but then becoming rich over time, and kind of just how that affects you over time. I overall just love all the issues and how Kendrick decided to tackle all these issues in this whole album, and it's just, he did it in such a unique way as well. This was definitely a huge highlight to me, and I will continue coming back to this record. For number 4, we have another huge release for this year. We have Dawn FM by The Weeknd. Kind of following similar, bullet points that I was saying for Beyonce's Renaissance. I think The Weeknd just has a very, very, danceable, very groovy record. There's a lot of great influences here of, 80s pop and a lot of great use of synths and guitars. I think my favorite element of this whole thing is how OPN in the production decided to incorporate guitars in this whole thing. The guitars I thought were very milky and very saturated, but in a really good way, in a really blissful way that kind of brought out all the other sounds. The fact that was saturated, it kind of emphasized everything, and just the way everything went together, it was amazing. On tracks like Gasoline and Out of Time and Take My Breath and Sacrifice. You got such high energy, and then The Weeknd comes in with these great vocals, these great harmonies that are layered on each other. Another top song of the year would have to be Sacrifice for me. And it's the same thing I was just talking about with these guitars layered on these synths. It's amazing. And what I've always liked about The Weeknd is that he's always used his voice as a secondary instrument. He's never tried so hard to make his voice the only appealing part of the track. I feel like he's overall tried to incorporate his voice in the track and tried to make it blend with all the instruments. And not blend in a sense where we lose his voice, but kind of where his voice is brought up and emphasized by all the other featurettes of this track. And I feel like there's a lot of great moments on this record where we get a lot of great melodies, a lot of great hooks, but a lot of great passionate vocals and passionate lyrics. I think Less Than Zero is such a great way to close out this record with not just how upbeat it is and not just how fun it is, but also just lyrically, he's all throughout the record talking about this girl that he misses. He misses her and he's dying to be with her. And then this one, he's not saying that he's happy that he's without her. He doesn't say that he hates her and he didn't get back together with her. He's kind of just saying, I can't get you out of my head, but that's how it is. I feel like it's this common thing, and I feel that I've experienced something like this before. I think it's a somewhat common thing that, even when you know something is not going to work out, even when you know a relationship or some opportunity is not going to work out, you feel good from it. And it's not because you're going to get something out of it. It's because you know that if the possibility were available, it would be great. I don't know, I'm kind of going on a tangent there, but if it makes sense to you, great. If it doesn't, sorry. At number three, we've got another great rap record, and that is JID with The Forever Story. JID has been on the rise for a long time now. He's had a lot of great moments, a lot of great tracks, a lot of great features over the past several years. I feel like that's how JID was getting noticed, though. I always thought, personally, that he was just going to be one of those rappers where when he would hop on a track or hop on a verse, he'd be pretty good, but his solo stuff would just never really take off. Not to say that it's bad, but to say that, he's just the guy you call for a feature. But this record clearly proved that theory wrong. This is another example of a very intimate record. And honestly, I do see quite a bit of similarities between this record and Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. That mostly being just with how open JID and Kendrick are. The track Crack Sandwich has to be my favorite on here, and it is so detailed, kind of just talking about, his life growing up and, all the drug dealers and all the violence that was going on in his neighborhood, and kind of just how people he loved, his friends and his family just got addicted to drugs over the years, and kind of how he's just watching that and getting somewhat desensitized to it. Dance Now is one of the sickest tracks I've heard this year. What's so great about this song is not just, the topics, because kind of just JID is basically saying throughout the song, he's listing a bunch of bad stuff, and he's just dance. No, but yeah, honestly, JID's flow, not just here, throughout the whole thing. I don't know why I'm just saying here, obviously throughout the whole record it's great, but his chemistry with Kenny Mason and his chemistry with most of the rappers on this album is great. He does this back and forth thing through most of the songs, and I think it's so clever. I think he does it so well. And a lot of these tracks throughout the whole list have switch-ups. And switch-ups, I feel like, are very hit or miss feeling. Obviously, I'm not the only person who feels that way. I feel like most people have that way towards tracks. But I feel like the switch-ups happening more and more frequently throughout this record just kind of creates this tone to it, and it helps create this atmosphere. In my opinion, I see it as a way of things are constantly switching up throughout the environment. Things are never staying the same. and kind of how that can just affect your mind as an artist growing up in a city like this. And I just love how Jid took the time to just really like narrow down and think, okay, let's think of everything that's kind of like affected me in my life growing up. All right, now let's put it in this album. At number 2, we've got another great rap album this year, and that is Denzel Curry with Melt My Eyes, See Your Future. This album is great, you know. Obviously, all the albums on this list, surprise, surprise, they're great. But what I really like about this is Denzel Curry. He just doesn't disappoint, man. And what's great about him is every record he's put out is so different from the last one. And honestly, by that I mean each record sounds like it was made by a different artist. But Melt My Eyes, See Your Future, to me, feels like his most complete album. I definitely feel like there's a storyline here, start to finish. I definitely feel like there's a clear beginning, middle, and end. On his album Taboo, I saw where he was going with his story concept of light, gray, and dark, but I honestly, especially in the middle, felt like the concept was getting lost. Not only that, but this album is very introspective. Feels like Denzel is taking himself out of his body and kind of just looking at himself growing up in this world. He's looking at himself working through this music career, working with all these different artists, and he's not sure if it's the right decision as he's making his rap album. It's like a cool, self-reflective, parallel, fourth wall break thing. And I honestly think this is his best record up to date. I think he's got his best versatility and his most creative flows here as well. My favorite lyric has to be the Run the Jewels line, because that's just, that was so cool. That track in and of itself is such a great creation, just a happening of everyone on the track happening to be in one place at the same time by chance. Kind of just meant to be, you know? And I also think Denzel did a great job incorporating jazz elements into this record. On the track Melt Session number 1 with Robert Glasper, I think he has such a great combination with his voice. Even though there's a contrast, it works with the way he's doing it. He's doing it harsh, but it's also smooth. Denzel isn't blending in. He's not taking the time to be like, okay, how do I match these instrumentals? He is taking the time to be, okay, this is cool, but I gotta make this better. Just the whole concept of this record, just with self-reflection and everything, and not to mention the whole Western movie approach to this record is just very unique. It's very new and fresh, and I love the freshness. But yeah, it's definitely rap album of the year. Ooh, and here we are. My number 1 album of the year. And honestly, I listened to this album for the first time probably like 2 weeks ago. And I knew from the first time I listened to it, after kind of going into tears, that this was album of the year. No other album this year have I resonated so strongly with. No other album that I have really felt such pain and such terror, but also such beauty. And this is it. My number 1 album of 2022 is Quadra's I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. This record can be summed up in one word, and that word is in the title, actually. Haunting. Essentially, this album is written from the perspective of a ghost that is haunting the house that he grew up in and he died in, essentially, and he's watching kind of his family live in his house, but also after that, like, kind of leave everything behind because they can't handle it, but then they're also starting their new lives. It's such a weird contrast seeing stuff from the perspective of a ghost. And I'm not saying this is the first time somebody has wrote something or made a song from the perspective of a ghost. Obviously, I know that. I just think, you know, obviously with it being done so much, I think this is such a great interpretation of it. One example of the weirdness on this record that I absolutely love is the song House Settling, that actually features Danny Brown. What's great about this album is that Quadra took the time to make a story in and of the whole thing, obviously, but here the story is essentially that the ghost is kind of walking through everything, or floating through, and there's a carbon monoxide leak in the house, and everyone in the house, with them getting so dizzy, they're starting to see the ghost. And then Quadra had Danny Brown write his verse from the perspective of carbon monoxide in the situation. And I didn't notice it exactly like the first time I was listening to the track. I thought Danny was also just writing from the perspective of a ghost, saying, "You can't see me, but I affect you." But after hearing it, I was like, oh my God. And then you got other tracks, like the intro on this album, Sorry for Dying, is such a great intro, because that in of itself feels just like a full, complete EP. It feels like a story, because there's so many different, segments to it. There's so many segments which do feel a little disjointed, and they could come off that way, but I don't feel that way when I listen to it. It doesn't feel jarring. It feels very purposeful and unique and complete. And I think not just on that song, but throughout the whole album, Quadra has such great variety in how he uses his voice. In other tracks like Born Yesterday, Don't Mind Me, and Fractions of Infinity, he's using his voice in more of an ambient tone to actually fit the ghost in space setting more. But then you got tracks like Tell Me a Joke, where we're actually inside the ghost's head. But then you got tracks like Tell Me a Joke, where I feel like we're actually taking in the mind of the ghost. That being, we're actually thrown in and we're just hearing all these internal thoughts, hearing all these jokes that the ghost is hearing 24/7, and he's not finding any humor in, because he can't find the enjoyment of humor anymore. And I also think Knots is such a brilliant addition to this album. With everything being so ambient, with everything before Knots being so ambient and being so in your face, Knots is kind of something new at this point in the record. We're getting something different. That being almost just a regular hype rap banger. But throughout the song, he's kind of just talking about the pain he's feeling throughout the whole day as he goes on. Knots in my head, knots in my chest. Does not sound fun. But yeah, this record just blew my mind. And the reason I had even listened to it in the first place is because all the reviewers I had heard talking about it prior had just kept saying this is not a Quadra album. And so when I listened to this record, obviously it blew me away, but then I listened to his old stuff, and damn fucking right. Like, this sounds nothing like the stuff he's done before. So, continuing on this trend of surprises, and that is what drove me to my pick selections this year. Kind of which artists, had been making stuff already, or made the biggest comeback, or made the biggest addition to their genres. Kind of just who surprised me, or who just made an image of themselves. Not just who made the best sounding music. And I feel Quadra definitely made the strongest turnaround. Not to say his music wasn't good before, it was definitely enjoyable. And especially on the record from me to you, it's enjoyable. But you hear all these ideas that Quadra has in his head, and he's just trying to figure out what is going on in there. And this album, you can hear that he's taking the time to figure that out. Apparently he went on like a year-long hiatus, and he kind of was just mentally tortured while making this project. I'm not saying he's the only musician to go through that, but when you're going through a tough time like that, obviously working music is a smart thing to do, therapeutic sense, but also just as a experimental sense to see if there's new ideas you have. But yeah, that is my top 20 albums of 2022. Like it or hate it, that's them. Obviously, I know I missed a bunch of records. If you made it this far to the end, and you think I missed some, please send them my way. I either didn't get to them, or I just didn't feel that I would include them in this list because they didn't strike me as hard as they struck you. But yeah, 2022 had a lot of great music, and 2023, I'm definitely looking forward to it.